On today's episode, I have the honor of welcoming Andrew Thompson, Navy Football's 1995 defensive captain and a defensive back, USNA class of 96. Known to many as Drew, he's a standout figure in the Navy Football Brotherhood and a key character in the renowned book A Civil War by John Feinstein. Drew's story is not about what he accomplished on the field, but most about the profound impact that he's had as a leader, mentor, and friend. So many examples of servant leadership in this one. There's no greater passion for Drew T. Whether he's connecting with teammates, guiding the next generation of leaders, or dedicating himself to his faith and family. Drew is a living example of what it means to embody strength and grace in all areas of life. Today we hit on the experiences that shaped him, the relationships that defined him, and the lessons he carries as a man deeply committed to his earthly team and eternal purpose. And if you haven't read the Army-Navy book, A Civil War, I highly recommend it, especially if you're in for a good underdog story about turning a program around. I plan on getting a few more people's insights onto this podcast that were inside that book. Now, let's go. Here we go. So today, very special guest, Andrew Thompson. I was reading the book Civil War, going through it, and I was like, man, I got to talk to this guy. For those that don't know, A Civil War, Army-Navy book. And I think it was, I did an episode with Lane Jackson, and he was like, have you read that? And I said, yeah, I've read that. I started reading it again. I was like, nah, I haven't read this. So it was great. It was a great refresher, especially right before Army-Navy's coming up. Andrew Thompson, he's the D captain of 1995 Navy football. I would say the original turnaround team. There's been a couple turns, and I would definitely say that era was definitely a turnaround situation. Class of 96, 24 years in the service, Navy Marine Corps, mostly Marine Corps time, all Marine Corps time, was a CO of a squadron. Before that, XO, aircraft maintenance manager. Spent a few years as Navy football's OREP, so that's a fun job. You did that right before RB Green took over. Now, fleet director for the largest, AB. I say AB. You have Benny Keith listed there as what? How does that work between those two different companies? What's the relationship, I guess?
Great question, Tony. Anheuser-Busch really is our wholesale equity partner. So we're just the distributor and the wholesaler. So it's just the distribution is 3 tiers. Anheuser-Busch brews, we store, and then we send it out and distribute it to retail partners. So that's how the relationship works.
Gotcha.
Been long standing. Yeah.
I got some bottling and canning background, so I had to ask that question about AB. Let's see. Raised in Ferndale, Washington. You made the leap to Newport with the prep school, then the boat school in Annapolis. The journaling habit when I was going through the book, Civil War, reading about you, I was like, man, I just started recently doing that over the past couple of years. It's been really good for me. Another reason why I wanted to get you on here. So, quick intro for Drew Thompson. And now we get into the memory section. So, this one has this whole memories thing. And I've had Clint Bruce on here. I've had Jervia Loda on here. Both said stuff about you. Has kind of developed organically. Sometimes I think, maybe I should pull it out. Absolutely not. I'm leaving it in. The whole, it's okay to look back, don't stare. We're not staring here. We're having some fun. First memory person is Brian Beef Dressler. Did that you say his name? Dressler?
Tony, could you say again? Came in a little broken up. Could you say again, buddy?
Brian Dressler? Dressler?
Oh, Beef Dressler? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Beef. All right. So that was his first name. He said, Andrew's one of the best leaders, husband, father, man I've ever met. Things I remember about him. He was our football team captain. He always led from the front and by example. He was first on the field, but last off, which comes up in the book, by the way, towards the end of it. You never questioned his giving anything less than 100%. He's someone you can always count on in good times and in bad. He always picks up the phone to reach out to someone in need. He's truly selfless. One funny story, when Clint Bruce and I were stationed together, Clint, Andrew, and I served at NSW together. Was that Naval Station
Naval Special Warfare. I didn't serve there with them.
Special?
I may have gone to visit them. I have no idea what this is.
Okay. He said Andrew called Clint while on a training exercise. I thought he was on travel, an obvious break from training scenario. What I didn't realize was he was literally in the middle of an exercise and called Clint from a building he was hiding out in, or that he was hiding in, with an opposition force surrounded him in the middle of that call, and they smoked him with, I guess, simulations, paint rounds. You could hear. He said I could hear screaming and pain over it, and doubled over laughing. Was that was that to you or was that to Clint? Does that ring a bell?
That may have been Clint on that call. I may need to get these guys on to verify that story. Did he say what year it was, Tony?
He didn't say what year. Well, so in the beginning it says Andrew called Clint while on a training exercise, and at the end it said I could hear Drew screaming in pain over it and Clint doubling over laughing. So maybe there was a
I
name
don't know what
swap
it
there.
was. There may be some truth there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was beef, and then the next one's David Jaforski.
Joseph Forsky. Yeah,
Joseph
Josie.
Horsky. He's a 97-year Navy linebacker. Um, Became a colonel in the Marine Corps. He said, fiercest
Yeah.
competitor on the Navy football team. He relentlessly pursued every tackle, gave every ounce of energy on every play. There was no giving up with Drew. He treats everyone with respect, and he makes you feel like you are the most important person in the world while talking to him, which is awesome. He's kind, engaging, and a dedicated friend for life. When I was a squadron commanding officer in the Marine Corps, I had Drew as our guest of honor for the Marine Corps birthday ball. During the night, he engaged with almost every Marine at that event, and he gave a rousing speech that everybody loved. He's an average Nino ball player, that which is played with a plastic ball, basketball size, and a racket court, and you can bump and push each other out of the way. This was a fun time in Okinawa that we had, along with some other Navy football players. So I'd never heard of
That's
that.
good. Josie, when you're deployed, you get some extra time on your hands on occasion, so you make stuff up. And most of those things you make up aren't always productive, but we found ways to stay in shape, which was pretty good. I might be average, but Josie and I are definitely both better than Clint Bruce. I promise you that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'd never heard of Nino ball, I guess. All right, next one. 98 guy, Greg Suma. He said, I remember when I was a
Yeah.
plebe and Drew was second class, the entire football coaching staff got fired. Part of that book thing I was telling you about. I was reading about. We were all in the locker room getting ready to work out, and Drew got after us to clean up the locker room. He wasn't being derogatory, more in the vein of, hey, we just got our entire staff fired, and why don't we clean up our act a little bit and look like professionals when the new staff arrives, type of deal. He said, I remember vividly, fast forward a couple months, I am the offensive rep for my class. The new staff had each class vote on an offensive and defensive rep to be, somewhat of an advisor or voice of the class to the team captains. And Drew was the team captain. He lived in one floor above me, and we used to walk to therapy every morning at 05:45. So I guess morning treatment. One day we were at team tables, and the battalion staff striper joined our table. Here I am, 265 pounds, starting offensive tackle, thinking I'm somebody as a youngster. And I started being a jerk to the striper. Natural friction from an athlete rebelling against an individual that, may have perceived that person was out to get me. Drew, without a beat, tells me stop acting like a jackass and welcomes the guy to sit down and share a meal with us. Fast forward 20 years, Drew is the CO of MALS 13. So MALS is Marine Air Light Squadron. How does that go again? I can't remember.
Marine Aviation Logistics Squadron.
Logistics Squadron. There we go. In Yuma. And I'm the XO for our first F-35 squadron. We have a Marine get killed in an automobile accident. Our squadron wasn't ready for it. The first person I called was Drew. His Marines came over and assisted immediately. Fast forward 2 years. I get put in command 6 months early due to my predecessor being relieved. I'll never forget feeling so ready. I literally asked the commanding general, "Are you done talking? I got a squadron to run." And I owe most of that to Drew. He is the consummate professional, treats everyone with the highest respect. He's rarely surprised because he plans and does the little things right. And he teaches and prepares those that want to be coached. But don't cross him because he still has it. So that's that one. All right, on to a guy that I've known and been kind of coached by was a guy named Ashley Ingram. Turns out he's a close friend of yours.
Mm.
He was Navy's offensive line coach and assistant head coach for, I guess, the 16 years-ish. Now the head coach at Carson Newman. This is his first year doing that. He said, coaching at the academy was a life-changing experience for me and my family. I had the opportunity to coach and work with so many outstanding people. Coach Niemont created a family culture that I'm trying to emulate down at Carson Newman. Drew Thompson was one of those special folks that entered my life. He became a lifelong friend and confidant. I think of all the conversations we've had about life, football, goals, family. As I reminisce about our time together, I think about his beautiful family. Our families went to church together, spent several Easters together. We all just hit it off. On a lighter note, I arrived at Ricketts early on a Saturday morning to find an ambulance there. As I'm walking in, I passed Drew on a gurney headed out. He said, I don't think he'd have or would have thought it was funny then, but I'm sure he'll get a kick out of it now. I'll let him fill you in. So you got to fill us in.
That was a rough day, man. I had a bad run-in with some kidney stones, Tony. I tell you, but
Ooh.
I tapped out, man. It was a rough day, and yeah, the kidney stones won, brother. That's pretty funny. I'd kind of flush that one to the bottom of the sea, man. That was a tough afternoon, certainly.
Put that one in the back of the memory bank. Got it.
That's it.
Again, special man, great representative of the academy. He's one of my go-to people when I have a tough decision. Love him. I'm blessed to call him a friend. All right, we're over the halfway point. 3 more to go. Next one is Jervy Loda, Fear Factor winner, commander of a ship, episode guest number 18. He said, I was a freshman when I first got into the defensive huddle and starting at free safety. I called the coverage from the back of the line. 2 intimidating seniors, linebacker Shane Holleran and Fernando Harris, were in front of the huddle, and they called the front. When it came to my turn, I froze, and I couldn't get the words out. I've never been so nervous in my life, but Drew took me aside, calmed me down, and reassured his trust in me. We never really talked before that moment, so it really surprised me that he did that. And after that intervention, I was good. His belief in me meant the world to me, and I can honestly say I wouldn't be the person today I am without his leadership. He's an absolute animal. He didn't know where to line up sometimes, but that was my job to tell him. it was his job to hunt. I love sharing the field with that warrior. So, old Jervy Alota.
That's great.
Ben Fay. All right. So in the book, quarterback, there's a mix between him and McCoy, who starts, who doesn't, based off strengths. He said there's no more loyal friend than Andrew Thompson. He'll rarely allow you to ask the questions, as he's continuously interested in you as a person, and what's going on in your world. So good luck with the podcast. He's an important character in the Civil War book by Feinstein. Only a couple of guys could have handled the attention without making it about them. So that's something I want to talk about. Andrew's always been a team guy, and he's the reason our team. That's the reason why he was a team captain in '95. He still stays in contact with Army's Captain Cantaloupe, which was another main player in that book. Hard worker, intentional communicator, aggressive, fearless. Was a great Marine. Would have been a great Navy spec war guy with Clint. Martial arts, Marine instructor, CrossFit instructor, whatever. We all knew him as Andy Thompson, only to find out he was called Drew or Andrew by his friends and family growing up. As I recall, Coach Chomp, who was awful at names, started calling him Andy, and I suppose everyone followed him, something like that. Drew named his oldest with a middle name of Drake. Another story we're going to get into, after his Navy coach that recruited him, the late Mike Drake. He said, my mom introduced Andrew to his wife, Allison. My mom taught elementary school with Al when Drew was stationed in Fort Worth with the Marines. Spent many Fridays with the 96 class contaminating the dive pool as youngsters and plebes with no liberty. Drew will remember the shenanigans. We certainly imbalanced the pool's chemicals. Luckily, escaped without anybody getting severely injured or messing around too much with the high dives. He filled the ever important role as the football Marine officer rep just before RB. One of the several great humans to fill that role and influence Navy players on their service selection in the Marines specifically. It's highly respected by Phil Emery, which was named Satan. And I guess y'all still stay in contact. So that's cool. His oldest brother won the Rose Bowl and at the University of Washington in the 80s as a linebacker. His dad was superintendent of schools. Fun fact, I think Andrew still writes weekly letters to guys that he's either served with or played with to just check in. Great penmanship. Funny enough, despite writing with letters, you keep log records with notes with the vast amount of books that you read. I do the same thing. Hey, may use them one day, may just be trash. I don't know.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? Clint reads a lot too, but I'm sure the notes stay in his head. Lastly, and
he does. He's got to read with pictures. He's got to read with pictures. Clint does.
With pictures. Got it.
Yeah.
Lastly, and probably most importantly, he's a committed follower of Jesus. The way he leads, loves his family and friends, makes you want to be a better person and worship God and Scripture with a loving heart. He consistently demonstrates this love of people. I also think the first time he saw Naps or Academy was when he reported. Let's see. And he's a very intense individual, never accepts a role unless he can put forth 150% commitment. And that was Ben. So
that's cool.
Last one is Clint Bruce, episode 20. He said, top 1% leader among leaders I know. Relentless stories about Drew Thompson's goodness. He is the Brotherhood. He taught it to me. He also made the football pants belt, a blue jean belt, a fashion statement. What's up with that?
I used to wear an old blue belt. I don't know. It never fit right. I'm not sure. It was too long for the pant size. I probably couldn't get a belt from Kevin Bull, who was the equipment manager at the time. I don't know. It was just something that became a thing and I wore it and didn't really match. It was good. It was just, how those things
Hey, yeah,
kind
you
of
just got
evolve. They just kind of
this
they
thing hanging around. I got
develop a
to
life of
make
their own. You
use
got to
of.
roll with it, man.
Yeah,
That's it.
awesome. See, also the ultimate Navy football representative to the brigade, solidified by throwing the ball into the stands after an interception. He and RB Green are the reasons I didn't get more personal fouls, because they would grab me by the back of the shoulder pads and almost after every play, pull me back to the huddle. Also, came the closest to helping me understand what cover 1, 2, and 3 meant, which I can resonate with because that's a huge deal for linebackers, especially those that love the run game and are learning how to defend a pass. So he said, I still don't understand it all, but he came the closest to getting me right. So, whew,
That's
that's
great,
it.
Tony. Thanks for doing that, man. Those are some great names. I'm grateful for that. They're a special group, all of them. And I mean, you know what it's like too, just knowing all the guys in the brotherhood. They're just, man, there's just such a special group of people. I mean, older brothers, younger brothers, everyone else in between, especially the guys that slogged it through with. They're pretty special people, man. I count myself lucky to be among them, though, without a doubt.
Yeah, I was getting back to Annapolis with that in that football trip. I was thinking, man, 1% of the 1% right here. Just felt really I want to say empowering, but like just humbled by just being around dudes like that, people like that, and there's no doubt about it. So, all right, this is where I say, tell us the story.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm really just grateful to be here. I mean, really a thrill to be here. It's going to take me a minute to get rolling, but I certainly hope to, like many of us, maybe even like yourself, Tony, we're looking for a chance to play. My
Yeah,
oldest brother was, 4-year letterman at University of Washington. Great teams in the Don James era back in the late 70s, early 80s. Don James, by the way, is the guy that brought Nick Saban into the business at Kent State. So it gives you kind of a sense
nice.
of the caliber of the coach that Don James was. But I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play in college. Small, undersized white kid from a small town in Washington State. There weren't too many offers at the end of the journey. I had great leaders, great coaches in high school. Played really hard, tried really hard, but there just wasn't a lot of opportunities there. And really, I think as it turned out, I really was going to go play really largely NAIA football at a place called Western Washington University, which no longer has a program, or I was going to try to walk on someplace. And really, really late in the game, there was a kid in my county named Ty Elmendorf who was being recruited by Navy. Ty was a great friend and kind of from a rival school. And Coach Mike Drake, was out on the West Coast on a recruiting swing and went to recruit Ty. Ty's dad, this is pretty cool how it all ties in. Ty's dad was an artilleryman, Marine officer in Vietnam. And Ty's dad said, hey, you're already as far out. Why don't you continue to go down the road and see this other kid out in Ferndale High School? Came out, walked in the door of the high school. I walked out of the library simultaneously, and I see this guy with a briefcase and a trench coat on. He looked like a salesman of some sort. And I said, could I help you, sir? And he said, yeah, I'm looking for someone. I said, well, try me. It's a small school. He said, I'm looking for a kid named Andrew Thompson. I said, nice to meet you.
Awesome.
And so we went and sat down, and Coach Drake, man, he looked at my scores, or he looked at my grades. I didn't have great test scores. Actually, I had really bad test scores. My grades were okay. Pretty good guy. I wasn't in any meaningful trouble. And he just gave me a chance, and it went from there. So Mike Drake, may he rest in peace, was the one guy that was the conduit to give me a chance. And, I agreed to go to the Naval Academy Prep School. Had never been east of Boise, Idaho, never got a recruiting visit, didn't get a chance to do any of that stuff, which was okay. I just wanted to play. And, you hear all these stories of, the old national championship in 1926 or the Heisman Trophy winners. And in those days, it was a lot closer to the great years of the Dallas Cowboys and Roger Staubach's playing there. He's the Heisman Trophy winner from the Naval Academy. It's got a different flavor because you're closer to it. And again, it was really, really big ideal because it was the biggest place I could go play. I had no military in my family. I knew I had a calling in my heart to want to go do something and to serve. So I went there to play football. That's really what it was. That's why I went. I knew you could get a good education. That was probably wasn't as important to me as it should have been. And I really didn't know much about, what it was like after the school. I thought, well, hey, I can go and I'll be employed for a few years after I'm done playing. I didn't know all the rest of what it was actually going to entail. And I didn't know what God's plan was at the time. So, stepped out in faith, took the chance, let it rip. I'm really, really thankful that I did. I didn't plan on staying for a career. I didn't know what I was going to do. Speaking of Marines in the program, the Marine rep at the time was a guy named Chad Van Holzen, and Captain Van Holzen was maybe class of 85 or 86. He was on that great team in the mid 80s that knocked off South Carolina. South Carolina was maybe ranked in the top 5 at the time, and Navy knocked them off. But I saw Chad Van Holzen, and I was like, that's what I want to be like that guy. And just who he was, what he looked like, how he carried himself, how he treated people. Huge influence. I didn't know the Marine Corps had specialties. I didn't know you could be an aviator or you could be in logistics or that you would be potentially in the infantry or whatever. I just knew I wanted to be a Marine. And that certainly was not casting aspersions on naval officers at all, but that's just what I wanted to do. And
Exact
so
same thing
all of
happened to
that.
me.
Who was the Marine at the time when you were there? Was Joe Speed in the job at that time? Or was it Tommy Vanderhorst?
No, Speed was my NAPS head coach before moving
Okay.
on to the academy. It was Captain Brian Hamilton, and then transition
Oh yeah.
was Bryce McDonald. So 2 killers.
Oh yeah, no, both of those two. Well, two great Americans. I mean, that's a pretty long line of really special people. One, you get to play in the Brotherhood, and then you get to go back and work in the Brotherhood, and yeah, there's a lot to that. And those of us when we get together, we kind of we share some good stories and have a lot of common experiences in that. Definitely some shared pain too. But
Yeah,
yeah, it was just great to be around them and be in that job. And again, that was really sort of the influence of what I wanted to do when I first went to the school.
gotcha. You ever get in trouble other than the
Um,
backpack thing from the book?
did I get in any trouble from what, Tony?
Yeah, I was just saying, as you were talking through it, I was like thinking about how the Marines that were there on the yard kind of inspired, me to take that route, and also something that clicked was getting in trouble on a summer cruise. So I had to ask, did you ever get in trouble? Other than in the book, it said something about you were wearing a backpack when you shouldn't have been at one point.
Oh,
So it was a joke.
I gotcha. Yeah, good, nice shot there. I mean, so many rules. You can't ever keep up with them. I don't know what I was doing. Probably wasn't paying attention. Probably didn't care. I never got in any meaningful trouble at the Naval Academy.
That's good.
Thankfully, I hate to admit that I never got caught. That's probably not much better,
Yeah.
but never got into too much trouble. Got donkey barbecued plenty of times on the football field. Got worn out a ton at practice and in games, but off the field, not too much.
Gotcha. Donkey barbecue. That's a new one.
I can't believe I think that's a Spence. That's
Is that a
that's a
Spence?
Spence or a Kenny Niumatalolo. Those guys, if you act like a jackass, they're going to put some sauce on you and you're going to get barbecued. So that's always the donkey barbecue is a pretty good term. I think there'll be a few
Definitely,
chuckles if anyone listens. And
definitely sounds like a Spenceism right there for sure.
yeah,
Well, cool. So that's how you got there to that whole Annapolis experience. Um, so when it comes to you're there, you do the first few years, and then all of a sudden this book, A Civil War, starts to become, an idea written. How did that whole thing work out for you with Feinstein writing the book? Was he like shadowing you, or how'd that actually work? And the
I'm
team.
trying to recall. It was actually really it was really non-invasive.
Okay.
It was not disruptive at all. John is really, really good. And bear in mind, so this is 95. John really gets on the map in 1986 with The Season on the Brink, which is the basketball bestseller about Bobby Knight and Indiana basketball. And if you can navigate like John did successfully through the corridors of Indiana basketball with Bobby Knight as the head coach, you could certainly navigate your way around the Naval Academy football program. And Army was a little bit late to agree to the book with John.
Yeah.
So John had a really, really unique ability to build trust with players and to build trust with his subjects really fast. He's a
Gotcha.
great listener, really easy to be around. He's got an encyclopedic memory of sports in general. So, I read his book when I was a kid, and I read, I think it was maybe when it came out, I was 8th or 9th grade. And so I knew who he was. This is a prominent sports writer. He's right in our backyard. I think we had some stories to tell at that point, Tony, because, this was our 5th year in the program. We played for 2 head coaches at NAPS. We were on our 2nd head coach at the academy itself.
Yeah.
I'd had 4 defensive coordinators, or I was on my 4th defensive coordinator in as many years, 3 position coaches in 4 years. And we were just really, we were tired of getting beat up, and we were tired of losing. It's a tough place to go. It's tough academically. It's tough militarily. And then, man, when you can't turn the corner on the football field athletically, it's pretty tough. And at that point, we were really ready to go. And maybe just a disclaimer here, man. I know those years, the 90s in particular, or our sort of team was the first half of the 90s. You could certainly debate the merits or the outcomes of the wins and loss column for our group, but you can't ever debate the team. You can never debate the teammates. You can never debate the brotherhood. It was really, really strong, even in some of those tough times. I mean, we lost 4 games to Army, Tony, by 6 points. So 2 of those games were 2 points. 2 of those games were 1 point. We beat Air Force one time.
I have
I mean,
a significant stat that I
they're tough,
wrote.
man.
Yeah, the stat that I wrote down, and it came out of the book was, that 96 game, the total number of points that, so Army's won 45 of the 40, it's 45 and 43, sorry, uh, in matchups where Army's leading, and 54 total points is the margin out of all of those games, which were scored over. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, you're right. It's always tight, and typically it's always low scoring because that defensive motion comes out, what you're all about, and it's just a battle. So, anyways,
A real battle. And really, it's evened out a little bit. Navy had the great streak for however many years, 14 or 15 years or so. But really, outside of that, Army made a really, really bad coaching decision when they fired Bob Sutton in the late 90s. It was a really, really bad decision and a critical mistake. And the program suffered for a dozen years, maybe 15 years, until Monk, obviously coming out of the Navy program and really following similar to Paul Johnson's footprint, went and did a great job down at Georgia Southern. He's just done a great job at Army, but those are really, really difficult years. Navy had the competitive advantage on multiple fronts. And, obviously mentioning Paul Johnson when he came in as the head coach in, I think, late 2001, early 2002, really, really turned that around. But those are really, really tough years, tough pills to swallow. When I was at NAPS, our NAPS team was 6-4, but the varsity team was 1-10. I was a plebe in 92. We were 1-10. My youngster year, we start out 4-2, and then we dropped the last 5 of the season. My junior year, we dropped the first 5 of the season. So those are really, really tough pills to swallow. And then my senior year, we were we were 1 point away from a winning season. So those were 11-game seasons at the time, and not as many games, of course. Navy was independent, so there was no conference, and it was some tough sledding. But by the time John came in, there was a story to tell, not just about our team, but about the game, about the rivalry, what it meant, its significance, the fact that there was a national affiliation with the game, much different than other big rivalries. I think this weekend you've got USC, UCLA. And if you're a grad or you're in Southern California, you're going to really pay attention to that game. Or you've got, I don't know, Michigan, Ohio State coming up. Those are big regional rivalries. Those are important rivalries. But outside of that, people in other regions of the country don't seem to care quite as much. I mean, you got Alabama and Auburn. Those are big games. But Army Navy's different. Army Navy's got usually an affiliation with someone from back home, a cousin, an uncle, a friend, someone who served in the Army, someone who served in the Navy. It's traditionally been played the last game of the season. It's kind of the swan song of the regular season. It's just, the president often goes to the game. I mean, the president may go this year. Game's on the line for the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. It heightens the fervor for the game, and it's just different. So John understood that and really wanted to tell the story and really had a chance to come back. I think he explored it in the late 80s and then came back and wanted to tell the story. So as he got to know the situation, got to know the players, got to know the schools behind the scenes, I think, there was just, it was really easy to have John around. He was never intrusive. He never meddled. He never pushed too far. He was just really, really easy to be around. And Tony, he didn't just shadow me personally. I mean, he shadowed a lot of players in our class, a lot of players on the team. He spent time with coaches. He spent time at both schools. He'd come to practice. He'd come to games. I mean, it was, in true brotherhood form, or true to the brotherhood, it was definitely a team effort.
Gotcha. I try to equivalate that to the whole, I think the year after I was gone or 2 years after, they did the HBO series or whatever. And I'm thinking, okay, if we took this class, your class, and fast forward them into the time frame of 2011-ish, 12-ish, and HBO docuseries or series comes out and tries to do the same thing, what John did back then, but into the HBO form, would it have changed things? Just because the intrusive part of it, and then the cameras, and I don't know, but
that was different. I mean, it's worth comment. So my first year back on the staff in 2011 was the season that they were filming. I think it was the Game of Honor, I think is what they called it.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
And it was really in many ways sort of the video story of John's idea in the Civil War. It was really interesting at the time. That was much different. That was much more intrusive. I mean, there were cameras and microphones and
gotta imagine that. Yeah, for sure.
It was clunky in the program, Tony. At least it was for me, because I was one of the few people who had known about the Civil War at the time. And so John was not a part of the HBO or the Showtime crew when he had tons and tons of insight and could have provided all kinds of commentary and support for that production. And NAAA, or I don't know exactly what or why, John wasn't involved with that, to their detriment, really. It could have told an even better story. But what HBO or Showtime did, and I think they did a pretty good job, John did so much better with the written word, and it was just different. Maybe I'm a bit biased, Tony, really, in kind of
I would agree. I'm a third party at this point, other than loving the Navy football part of it. I would say, the book's definitely better. A lot of things, the book's usually better, but just my take on it. So
I was glad to see a lot of the players featured. I mean, there were some of the firsties that were, thinking about their different service selection and going through training in Quantico or coming out to practice and being a part of that. I loved seeing the players getting featured and the program getting featured. It was also a great recruiting tool because things were starting to evolve in terms of a lot more video content, a lot more being able to distribute that to potential recruits or players, much different than kind of a pre-internet age and a pre-cell phone age. Some people might think of that as the Stone Age these days, but just a different time. But I was really happy for the players.
Yeah, it's crazy how things change, and especially with technology and hey, just share and all that kind of stuff. So, um, the new coaching staff. So you're talking about cycling through all these coaches, 4 defensive coordinators. Um, how was that? You get, Weatherby comes on the scene. OC is Paul Johnson, which a lot of us know, and in my era, uh, which I'll ask about. And then Bumpus, I know there's a lot of respect there. Gary Patterson. How did that new coaching staff go? Um, this is me reading the book and being like, I want to ask questions about this. So, how did the actual, in your mind, that new coaching staff, how'd it go?
It went great. I mean, it went really, really well. I mean, as far as staff transitions really can transpire, those are disruptive, lots of change. It's new opportunities for coaches. And look, man, I think in fairness, Tony, I've always tried to go out of my way to thank George Chomp and his staff. I mean, I never would have got a chance had it not been for Mike Drake and even George Chomp have proven that a chance for me to go. I would imagine a lot of my guys in our class, Joe Speed, Andy Person, Garrett Smith, Brian Grana, all of those guys would feel the same way. And look, man, it's a results based business. It's a very, very difficult business that way. And we were there for 3 years, and in a lot of ways, we as players didn't get it done. I mean, they coached, they put game plans, they put scouting reports. We do it together, but man, we had a role to play, and those guys getting fired, and so we own some of that, and I've always felt bad about that. The coaches understood too. It's a tough business, and they understand that you got to win, and you got to win now, and it's tough. But having said that, the new staff coming in just brought in a fresh perspective. They brought in a different level of experience. They brought in some. They were on the younger side of the coaching business and brought in some fire, and we needed it. I mean, Charlie Weatherby was, I think he was just 39 or 40 years old as the head coach. I think, goodness, Niemot was in his probably mid to late 20s. Paul Johnson, early 30s. Gary Patterson was maybe 30 years old. Phil Emery was in his early 30s, who was the continuity through all of it. I mean, I can talk about Phil Emery extensively about how impactful he was as our strength and conditioning coach,
Yeah,
and
the
just
Rock.
really in many ways the ultimate mentor, man. I mean, there was so much respect for Phil that during the coaching change, if Phil had not been retained, probably half the team would have walked. Like, hey, look, if you want us to play, we're going to play. Phil stays. There's no questions asked. That's how it's going to go down.
Let's do that right now.
And it
Tell us
really did.
tell us more about Phil, and what made him that rock, that transition guy. Everything he was about.
I think anyone from the 90s, I think Phil came into Navy from the University of Tennessee. And interestingly enough, Phil dated back to the old Western New Mexico days and the upper Midwest days in Michigan with Mike Drake, who recruited me. So they were friends. Mike Drake eventually got Phil to the Naval Academy. Phil was young and hungry and smart. Still think too, I mean, this is late 80s, early 90s, the strength and conditioning, I guess, as an industry or as a significant component of a football program's success was still in relatively early stages.
Yeah.
But Phil was firm and fair and absolutely consistent. Didn't miss. Always, he had that rare ability to manage a group and then also tailor that specifically to know the individual. There'd be, and in the old days, Tony, there was Ricketts Hall was not in its current configuration, so we were all jammed in the bottom of the eighth wing.
Yeah.
So you had kind of the front end toward Dahlgren Hall was the weight room, and then the back end toward the tennis courts and the fields was the locker room. And so you'd have 50, 60 players in a really, really confined space. And if you were in there doing what you were supposed to do, you really felt like Phil was coaching you and coaching you alone. And everybody felt that way. There was an energy, there was an excitement, there was a level of accountability. And he wouldn't be afraid to get up in people's business that were dogging it or not doing what they needed to do. He held people accountable. Extra conditioning, you show up late, no problem, you're going to get hammered. everyone understood that there were no surprises, and that was really, really consistent, and people really responded well to that. Young men understand pain. They understand that very,
Yep.
very well. Older men understand guilt and shame. Young men understand pain. Phil knew how to pull that lever very, very strategically. And in fairness to Phil, Tony, I would imagine I can speak for a lot of the players in the 90s. Phil was also the first person they would want to go talk to if they needed some help.
Awesome.
If I was not a great student there. I did really well on a paper one time. I wanted Phil to see it.
Yeah.
Guys loved him, still do. But it tells you the kind of guy he is. He became a tenured professor at the Naval Academy. The Ricketts that you had a chance to train in for all those years, that was really his brainchild. And
Awesome.
that opened, I guess, in the fall of '95. Phil went on to a really, really successful career in the National Football League, left strength and conditioning, went into professional scouting, became a general manager of the Chicago Bears,
Nice.
director of pro scouting, college scouting, worked with the Chiefs, worked with the Falcons. He just retired, but just awesome, awesome guy. And, he did all the advanced work for the team. He'd go out the day or two before the game, get the hotel set up, always dressed to the nines, super professional, had to, do the timeline on the board before the game. He really was leading edge in a lot of ways. We trained very, very unconventionally. It was really, really difficult. The training was highly, highly rigorous because too, Phil knew what he was dealing with. I mean, we weren't a program that was going to line up and blow people off the ball. You know what that's like.
Yeah.
So we're just going to be tougher, and we're going to be physically ready to play. And
It only gives us a chance. Yeah.
That's it, man. You just get a chance. And he was really good about that. I think if you talk to anyone from the 90s, you talk to Jervy, you talk to Clint, you talk to Ben Fay, you talk to Red Raider, you talk to Josie, those guys, you talk to any of them, they would probably tell you something very, very similar.
Awesome. Well, how about old PJ? How was he back then? Because I can remember how he was in my playing days, but how was he as a younger PJ?
You imagine the older, more mature versions of all those now soon to be or really Hall of Fame level coaches. They were just as fiery, just as competitive, but when they're younger, they have a lot more energy. So you can imagine what that's like.
I just talked to Sean White, and one quote that I pulled out of the book about PJ was he had asked Weatherby permission to pitch a fit. And I was telling Sean, I was like, yeah, when he became head coach, he didn't ask permission anymore. He just did it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, PJ was great because he's really, really smart, and he was kind of like Mike Leach. He didn't play college football, but he really, really understood the game. He had a great processor, so he's always several steps ahead of what's going on. Same thing when he was the OC, and he'd say stuff to players too. He didn't mince words. Son, if you find yourself in the game, call timeout because you're not going to help us, right? If you're not ready to play,
That's in the book.
He'd say a lot of funny, witty stuff like that, but I liked him. As there's always a fair banter that goes back and forth between the offense and the defense. And he was always really good about that. And we'd line up 1 versus 1 or 2v1 or whatever it was. And he was always pretty good about that. Really, really liked those coaches. On that staff was Mike Prefer. Mike Prefer was a grad from the school who played lightweight ball when he was a mid, but he had just come out of Desert Storm and wanted to get into football as a profession. I think he's with Minnesota Vikings as a special teams coach. Gary Patterson goes on to be the winningest coach all time in TCU history. Niemot's the winningest all-time coach in the Naval Academy history. PJ is going to be, or is already in the College Football Hall of Fame. Dick Bumpus is as good as you get. Coached at Notre Dame, coached at all 3 service academies. He was a All-American at Arkansas. Bump was great.
Coach to coach at service academies.
Well, it does, and Bump was just kind of that way. He was a bit of a journeyman, went around and coached at a lot of places, but really, really knew how to get players ready to compete on Saturday. He had a great I still have his coaching philosophy. I can show it to you if you ever want to see it, but all of his off the field scripting and preparation of how to run practices, how to run a defensive philosophy, what that meant for the different position groupings, what that meant for coaches and holding people accountable. And really more importantly than that is bringing out the best in players. He's really, really good about that. Tommy Ray was a linebackers coach. He'd been an Army Ranger, tons of energy, tons of enthusiasm. That kind of linebacking core, Tony, that you were a part of with Ross Pospisil. And, you can kind of go back about every year, every other year, there's that new cadre of guys coming up. Tommy Ray fit into that group really, really well. Always a special group of players and coaches there. So we were hungry, man. We were really, really highly desiring to win and compete and improve. And we were ready for whatever they threw at us. And I think what they liked about us is, I think a lot of coaches do at service academies, is they can load players up pretty heavily. They can get after players. They can coach them hard. And the players are just going to keep coming back for more. And we were ready for that, man.
Awesome. So Patterson was your position coach, Gary Patterson.
He was.
Was there a certain thing about him that made him different to you?
There were several things. He was actually, you see Gary on the sideline when he was at TCU, really fiery, big vein. He saw, he's hollering at refs and calling plays in and sweating. Gary's really, really funny. He's really funny. He's really uniquely talented. He plays the guitar. I remember he came to some classes with me when they first came on board, and he had a wide range of interests beyond football. And Gary just doesn't make any, I've got to know him, of course, over the years living here in Fort Worth. I'd go up and watch tape with him at TCU, or they'd have food in, and he's the kind of guy that eats last and serves you food. I mean, still, I got a great story. Gary, the TCU beat somebody in a bowl game. Maybe it was Oregon. This is 7-8 years ago. Sorry if I'm not getting my facts straight. They had this great comeback. They win the game. I go to lunch with him a few days later. He had a knee replacement. So we go eat lunch, and we go down to the Colonial Golf Club here in Fort Worth, and people are razzing him. And I'm just sitting there having lunch with him. I'm not reaching in his pockets. I'm not an alumnus. I'm not an old player at TCU, just a friend. And, he's the kind of guy that we go into the pro shop, and he's like, pick out anything you want in the golf shop, and they take anything you want. And it's like, Coach, I don't need anything, man. He's like, do it now. And I picked out a polo shirt, and he bought it. That's the kind of guy he is. He's just super, super generous. He's really funny. But as far as football is concerned, Gary was really, really highly intelligent in terms of the game. He had like off the charts football IQ, and what he did that was distinctly different than what I'd seen before is he taught really, really clearly with the tape. And so he'd bring it up, and we watched a lot of practice. And I was not accustomed to that. We had seen some practice, or you watch a lot of game tape, or maybe some scrimmage tape. But we'd watch a lot of individual, and we'd watch a lot of pass scale or perimeter, and then we'd watch team, and then we watch game film. And he's really, really cognizant about the nuance of the game, about how you align, have pre-snap read, exact alignments, adjustments, communications. He was just really, really good about that. And he could anticipate well. So if, it's 3rd and long and you're playing this team with these tendencies, of course, these are all pre-computer software days. It was like cheating almost, because he was giving you the answers to the test. Yeah. And so he was really, really, really strong about that. He had a lot of confidence in his abilities, and he knew where he was on the staff, but you could tell he was operating 2 or 3 echelons up. I mean, he's thinking like a head coach. In fact, speaking of – go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's – anytime I can see that with someone, I just get extremely interested in them because of their ability to break it down to very clear, simple ways. The teaching aspect, like those geniuses that figured out how to explain stuff to, make it understandable. So that's a cool one.
That's right. Gary, speaking of the Civil War, Gary was not in favor of the Civil War up front. He didn't like the idea of bringing in a new staff, adding another potential distraction to the players. Like, hey, we're focused. We're trying to get this off the ground. And he was outspoken about that. And he told John that up front. But interestingly enough, and this is a real tribute to John, is that John did such a good job that later on in the season, Gary came back to him and said, John, I was wrong. And I'm really glad that you were part of this to tell this story. And,
Awesome.
that's the kind of guy Gary is, right? He's going to let you know where he stands, but Gary is also willing to kind of rethink his position on stuff. But yeah, Gary was funny. Gary also understood psychology really well, and he understood the psyche of a young man. And he was highly demanding, to the point where you knew exactly what was expected, and if you stepped outside of that, you would hear about it. But he did that in a way where you understood that it was all leaning toward a greater purpose. And so he knew psychologically that if he would relent and take his foot off the gas, that really the standard of performance would also naturally gravitate away from the standard. So he was really, really good about pressurizing the week's preparation. He said, look, I'll embarrass you here on Tuesday and Wednesday. I care about you enough so you don't get embarrassed in front of 70,000 on Saturday. He just understood that thing really pretty well, and was able to keep the necessary tension in the building or in the position room, certainly. And we responded pretty well to that. I think the results, I think quantifiably, Tony, fact check me on this, but I think in 94, our team was in the bottom. We were 120th or so in total defense. And the very next season, 95, with that staff that came in, and I think with 7 or 8 of the same starters, we moved up to top 20 in the nation in total defense. And
Awesome.
So we moved up 100 spots in one season with largely the same guys. You get a guy like Sean Andrews that comes in and leads the nation in interceptions. He's a second-team All-American, came out of nowhere, great player. Guy like Jervy coming into his own, great linebacking core. Mentioned Fernando Harris and Clint Bruce. You got Joe Speed, you got RB Green. You got some players that were really, really hungry, highly competitive. And then you match that with some really, really good and fresh expertise. It was kind of a catalyst to send that team moving in a positive direction.
Awesome. It's good stuff. Anything else about your time playing before we move on to the rest of your story?
I think, look, man, I'd say this, and I could start running down a list. Just the goodness of the team, goodness of my teammates, awesome people, unbelievable. And that you played with similar types. You could fill in the blanks with all kinds of names and faces and stories, and just being all about the team. But from the older players that I was first exposed to, largely in the class of 91, Frank Shank and his teams, Alton Grizzard, Bobby Gopfarth, Bart LaRocca, Chris Yonke. Man, the sort of the precedent and the introduction that they put in place for us as we first came to Naps, and then got to know the 92, and then all the way through the guys that came behind us. But just the goodness of the teammates. Sean Stevenson, who was in our class, Sean Stevenson's brother Dion was killed in Desert Storm.
Yeah,
Sean came to Navy, big part of the book, but just a big part of our lives. We go to Naps. We got Sean. He's a corporal. We've got, force recon, jump wings, and dive bubbles. And you're thinking, okay, this is what the epitome of a non-commissioned officer looks like. We had that kind of example early, and Sean was just a huge part of that class. You think about Andy Person, and then all the rest of the Person brothers. Andy was the first one, and then Chris and Danny and Joe, and just the rest of their gang. Really, really special. But
there was a kind of a Sean equivalent in my time, a guy named Eric Montgomery. I'd like to try and get him on here one day too. Similar story with the brother.
Amazing stories. Joe Speed's story, certainly an incredible one. Garrett Smith, who was our offensive co-captain that season, smart, talented, great disposition, always cool under pressures, had great success over the years professionally, and just a high character guy. I just think about the goodness of our team and the goodness of our teammates. Look, we didn't beat Army. We weren't that successful on the field. And I've told them this, or told my teammates this, man, I wish we would have won a few more games. But what that did for us in terms of just forging and hammering character and resilience and just sort of this long suffering and forbearance, man. They were awesome. And many days when I didn't want to feel like doing it, man, you know what this is like. You look over and you see someone there getting after it, and you're like, okay, I'm here. I am. I'm not going to let them down. And
Yeah.
I feel so strongly about who they are as people, and the teammates that they were, and the leaders that they became, and then the men that they are, and that the fathers and husbands that they are. Just, man, lucky beyond measure, man.
Yeah, definitely came out in the memory section of everything you just talked about, for sure.
Mm.
All right, so then you transition, you go to Marine Corps. How was that for you?
It was a good transition. It's what I wanted to do. I was thankful to be a Marine. I'm glad I made the cut. I joke with a lot of people, man. I fooled a lot of people for a lot of years, and they never figured it out. Really glad to be a Marine. What I liked about the Marines, unlike the meritocracy at the Naval Academy or maybe other places, the Marine Corps really values hustle, values toughness, values showing up. The Marine Corps doesn't really care if you know or not, as long as you care enough about trying to learn what you need to learn and really leading Marines. And there was a lot of overlap, as I'm sure you experienced, Tony, in the Marine Corps with the things we learn in the Brotherhood and in the football field and under a heavy barbell and all that stuff. And just a lot of team contact sports that translated really well to the Marine Corps. And I was really lucky too, because some of the Marine Corps units I got assigned to are a lot like, it'd be the equivalent of a rookie getting drafted into the Pittsburgh Steelers organization or into a really storied tradition. I went into, Marine Attack Squadron 211. I was in VMA 214, the Black Sheep. I mean, I was in some really good squadrons that, similar to the Navy football program, really took care of the younger Marines and kind of brought, put their arm around you and showed you the way to do it. And I was really lucky with that. And I just wanted to be a part of the team, wanted to be a part of the locker room, ready room. Didn't want to let my fellow officers down, wanted to do my best to earn the respect of the enlisted personnel. And yeah, it was great. A lot of hard work but nothing I wasn't accustomed to, getting your teeth kicked in the football program,
Yeah. So you end up becoming a CEO of a squadron. How was that?
It was really, it was special.
That's kind of a pinnacle of a lot of people's, wants and desires of being in the Marine Corps, being a Navy department head, division, whatever. You got a squadron. Did you have a favorite thing about doing that, or a favorite moment?
Well, definitely several favorite things, a few favorite moments. I never set out to do that. I mean, I guess as I came to learn, especially having had the stop off in Annapolis, it was my only chance to be, I guess, the equivalent of a head coach. And after a while, you do all the work, you do all the legwork as a young guy, and then you work your way up through the ranks, and then maybe you're a coordinator or you're able to call some plays, and then you make it to a point where you get a chance to be the head coach. And again, I didn't set out to do that. That wasn't a goal. I didn't define my career by that. But interestingly enough, I had a conversation with an officer who was in our squadron previously. So this was maybe 2009, about the time you were playing at Navy. And her name was Lex Vogelsang, and Lex was an 04 grad. She was a volleyball player. She was in the squadron. And we were just talking about the Marine Corps and about leadership. And she said, "Hey, are you gonna screen for command?" And I said, I'm not really interested in doing it. It's not that big a deal to me. And she said, "Well, you don't really have a choice, do you?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "This isn't about you. This is about the Marine Corps. This is about other people." And she said that, and I was always grateful to Lex for that, because I wasn't thinking that way.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that she prompted me and said that. I give her a lot of credit for that. Lex was a great officer, smart, bright. We're really glad to have her. And anyway, she said that. And so I ended up, applying and got selected. And I think probably the most memorable thing, Tony, the most memorable things were seeing other people be successful, watching Marines get meritoriously promoted, getting recognized, Marine of the Quarter. We had Marine Aviation Maintenance Officer of the Year in our squadron. We had, a guy named Steve Hulse, who was just awesome story. Grew up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, or Kansas, and then Fort Smith, Arkansas, repairing outboard engines, Mercury outboard engines for so boats could operate on the river. And he took those skills into the Marine Corps, made his way all the way up through the ranks.
Nice.
Just seeing people be successful, helping guys like Greg Suma and his squadron. They were getting a F-35 squadron ready for operational capability, and just doing all kinds of really leading edge things, sending people overseas, just all kinds of things to contribute, serving in peacetime and the nation's time of trouble, man. I mean, it was highly, highly rewarding getting to serve in a command team with an XO and a sergeant major, and working with guys like Luke Watson and Bob Mena. And I could go through a ton of stories. Andrew Berger from your class, you probably know Andrew. Yep. Andrew was an officer in our squadron, great guy. I got to promote Andrew to captain. That was really cool.
Very cool.
Stories like that, really, really meaningful, and just getting a chance to be a part of that and do my part. Marines for generations have done that long before I came around, and I know there'll be some good ones that certainly come after. But it was a lot of fun, man. Really, really glad to do it.
Awesome. After Marine Corps, after 24 years, you transition. How did the transition go? Where'd you end up? What'd you do?
That's it. Were you ever on the kickoff team, Tony?
Yes, I was. Definitely sophomore year, and I think transitioned off on junior year because they're like, hey, you're too gassed after kickoff to play defense. So
yeah, fair enough. So you understand the analogy I'm hoping to share here. When you run down on the kickoff team, it's reckless abandon, and you're trying to make a play, and usually it hurts. I mean, you're going to bust a wedge, or you're going to get ear hold, or you're going to be on the ground.
Concussion.
That's right. You may go off the wrong sideline. That's really what I felt like transition was like. I felt like I was well prepared. I thought I had a lot to offer. That was not the case for me personally. I know not all transitions are created equal, and I know a lot of guys have had great transitions. That was not necessarily the case for me. And I think it was just probably the Lord teaching me a lesson in humility for what I had to at least be prepared for in the years to come. So I've been retired now for 9.5 years. And my first job, I worked in a tech startup. I got laid off, went out and branched out on my own and made a little bit of money doing some consulting and business advisory services and some other things. What I didn't realize is that was a real gift, because I put my life back together, and I was broken physically, and I think in some ways broken spiritually and mentally, but I hadn't really taken the time or really done the necessary work to kind of realize who I was in a post-military environment. And that was really helpful. It was hard, but it was helpful. Then I went, and a Marine Corps buddy of mine called and said, hey, we need some help running a small manufacturing startup here in Dallas-Fort Worth. Can you help us out? Sure. Go do that. We have to close the business down after about 6 or 7 months. We couldn't raise capital and bring in some additional investment. It had already taken some lumps, but the plane was starting to go nose down on its way to the runway, and we were able to.
What were you making?
We were making electrostatic disinfection machines. So imagine a suitcase, a rolling suitcase type unit with a wand and a special patented technology to disinfect large scale areas in a short period of time. So imagine, Tony,
Gotcha.
we were about a year too early before COVID. So
yeah,
man,
that's where my head went, was like, all right, COVID.
Yeah, it was tough. So anyway, I left the company at that point. The company kind of resurrected, and they were able to do some good things and help a lot of people, but I was gone at that point. So again, I submit fully that I took some harder decisions to take a little bit more risk. I'm really, really thankful for those, but too long 6-month periods of unemployment. I had a little bit of retirement coming in, which was helpful, and I could pay my bills and had some medical care, but there wasn't a lot of margin.
Two layoffs as well. So
yeah,
right there with you.
So what that feels like. So
it sucks.
It's pretty tough. And so a good segue too, where I ended up going and worked for Caterpillar for about 18 months, coincidentally through a Brotherhood connection. Billy Yarbrough saw a guy with a Navy football t-shirt on whose son was going to the Naval Academy. The guy had been in the Navy and hired me. I got to work for a great guy, John Brand, and then his son, JB. just graduated a couple years ago. Super, super guy. Graduated with a 4.0 from the Naval Academy. Smart dude, submariner, special guy. But I got a chance to do that. And then I've been in my current role for about 4 years. But through all that, you wonder, maybe we'll talk about the price of admission here in a minute, but what I'm really thankful for about the football program is that, you still got to go back to practice, and you may win on Saturday or you may lose on Saturday, but you got to go back to practice unless the season is over. And so you get to the end of the season and it's cold, and maybe you got beat, and maybe you got beat bad. We got beat quite a bit, but it's full pads. It's Monday, it's conditioning, it's corrections, it's scouting report, it's install, whatever it may be. But you're going to have to put your gear on in your head and have to go back out to practice. And whether you feel like it or not, whether you want to do it or not, it doesn't really matter. I knew Joe Speed was going to practice. I knew Andy Person was going to practice. I knew Brian Grano was going to practice. And some guys were going to play in the next weekend's game, and some guys were not going to play. It didn't matter. Guys were going to practice. And so that was really, really helpful guidepost for me. Just, making some of those choices day to day. And you may appreciate this, Tony. I don't know, or maybe some of the Brotherhood guys will, but I was too dumb to know I couldn't do it, and I was too stubborn to quit. And so I just kept putting my gear on.
As you know what over here. So I got you.
That comes with some pain and maybe some occupational hazard, but you got to know too, on the other end, when things have reached their culminating point and when it's time to make a change. And, I'm thankful for a lot of that, man. Lived through some stuff that I didn't anticipate. I got smacked with a pretty nasty depression that I didn't see coming, that I didn't effectively deal with, or that I didn't really know how to deal with. I'd never dealt with that in my life. That lasted about 10 years, man. I'm in a good place. Thankfully, I've got some care, and, it's okay not to be okay as long as you're getting some help. And, guys like Ben Fay, or guys that you can walk shoulder to shoulder with, and you can just talk to them, close confidants. Certainly God's grace, his goodwill, his forgiveness, and his mercies being new every day and every morning, man, certainly allowed me to be here talking to you today. So I'm really, awesome. Really thankful for a lot of that, man.
That's good stuff. Through all this, do you have a favorite mentor, best mentor?
Man, I have some good ones, and man, it's hard to pinpoint just one. I would say through it all, and I'm going to make a comment on a couple other leaders here just momentarily, but I think through all the Naval Academy experience, it's far and away, it's Phil Emery, just personally and professionally, and just the toughness, the fairness, the resilience, and really just the care,
Yeah.
Care and just genuine love for us, Phil. But look, man, when you think about getting a good start and you sustain a transformation into doing something hard, that 95 season, John Feinstein captured that in a lot of meaningful ways from a football standpoint. But go ahead.
That's something I can remember. I didn't write down was there was going to be a snow from the book about Phil Emery was there was some sort of weather that came in, and the snow and the ice, the guys are thinking, we're going to get tomorrow off because of all this weather. Nope. The next morning he's sitting out in his car, ready to go with workouts for the day, where the whole team thought, man, maybe we'll get tomorrow off because of this weather. That he had woken up extremely early so his car could creep all the way to the gate and be there for the team.
Coach, the whole Eastern Seaboard was shut down. I mean, it was shut down. The academy was shut down. The whole government infrastructure at the roads. He drove a Ford Taurus, man, and he lived over in kind of Cape St. Clair over in there.
Found a way. Consistent.
Found a way. He found. Here's the Phil. Guys, you know how it works. Some guys are always looking for an out, right?
Yep.
Phil
And
was
my
about two.
kids last night we had a little dusting that just happened today. Or sorry, last night. Last night they were talking about it, and today like, oh, school's going to be no, guys, it's not happening.
Not happening. And Phil, you know, Phil was just so consistent, and he was always 2 steps ahead of everybody else. So guys would try to pull the I can't make it to the 5:30 a.m. run because I'm sick and I got to wait to go to medical. Phil's like, no problem. You check in with me first. You muster with me. I don't care if you're. Then you can go to medical. It was awesome, man.
See if he
Uh,
passed the sniff test.
yeah, that's exactly right. So he did a lot of stuff. So Phil Emery, but in the book, and you think about being so lucky and being so fortunate. So our superintendent was Admiral Larson, Chuck Larson. I mean, excellence without arrogance, shipmate himself. Man, he got to know the student body personally. He was a 4-star admiral. He'd been former SINC PAC. He was his second stint at the academy. He had been the superintendent there in the 1980s. And Captain Bogle, Randy Bogle, who was our commandant, a midshipman, a warrior of warriors, and just, I mean, just a great example of what it meant to be. And he was an officer and a gentleman. But you had Admiral Larson, you had Captain Bogle. Our O reps were a guy named Colonel Glenn, is no longer with us. Colonel Glenn had been the CO at HMX-1 in Quantico, flew President Reagan and George H.W. Bush, flew them around in that role. And he was the senior Marine. He had been I think he'd been the brigade commander as a former enlisted Marine, class of 67 or class of 68. Unbelievable leader. Captain Butler was the other officer rep. You had Major Ortiz, Junior Ortiz. He's a retired lieutenant colonel. Did some remarkable things. The intelligence community. Junior was just, we're still friends to this day. Junior had a great way with the mids, a great way with the Marine selectees. A guy named Kirk Herrick, Chief Herrick, came in as a frogman when they started adding those senior enlisted roles to the company areas. And Kirk came in and embedded himself virtually overnight with the lacrosse team and the football team. And you mentioned Beef Drexler earlier. Kirk was instrumental in bringing guys like Beef Drexler into the teams, Tommy Rhino, Clint Bruce, of course, and just a number of those guys. Kirk had great people skills. We're still friends. Kirk's son Brandon's in the teams. Really, you talk about mentors and really shining examples of what it meant to lead and serve other people. I mean, I got a great start. Really great start, and I was really thankful for them.
Awesome. A few more. We'll close this thing out. One is biggest failure, perceived. I'm not going to say failure. I say failure just so it's out there, but opportunity, whatever, of, hey, this thing happened. I learned a boatload from it. What was that for you?
Well, I think I should attribute this quote. I'm sorry I can't do it, but the pain and the pleasure, the success and the failure, it's all a privilege. It's all a privilege. And well, maybe by worldly standards or by human standards, if you fail at something, it seems as if it's kind of the end of the road, and it's not. Failure is not fatal. Success isn't final. I think Winston Churchill, that's loosely attributed to him, but to know that the setback and the failure, no matter how much it hurts, is a part of character, and developing that, because of that leads to perseverance, and perseverance leads to hope, right? And so I think that the failures is certainly business failures. Didn't work out in a startup. I really couldn't scale my business the way that I really truly wanted to, or even knew how to. Took another one that failed. We had to send all the employees home and write them a check and close the business right before Thanksgiving. That's tough. You look them in the eye and you just talk them through that. You're not going to be real popular about that. Making hard leadership decisions that are very, very difficult for other people to deal with, but that are the right thing to do. Maybe looking at an endeavor at a technology startup that when I worked for Caterpillar, that was, the results were debatable, certainly. And all of those things, though, added together, create something I think that's really pretty unique. All the failures in the football program, the failures academically, the failures in terms of the win and loss columns, the failures in terms of a program that should have been healthier than it was, the failures of maybe even us as players not doing exactly what we needed to do to help the coaches put food on their tables. Whatever it may be, those are certainly lessons learned, and hoping that we have enough objectivity or enough care to look at that and maybe not see it necessarily as something that's terribly negative or detrimental, but something that's hopefully can be shared with someone else. Clint talks about sharing scars, and if you do that with other people, you can either spare them some time or spare them some pain and save them some time. And
Yeah.
so whatever it is that we have to endure is something to be shared with someone else to hopefully provide a roadmap or maybe some kind of a chance to bounce back wherever they may be. So, probably deep down, maybe we become gluttons for punishment, but those are hugely formative, hugely meaningful. I'm truly thankful for them. And maybe there's some other good things on the horizon, and I'm joyful and hopefully patient in that in affliction, and hopefully trying to be faithful in prayer along the way.
Awesome. There's something that I do quite often when I'm, in emails or in posts or whatever, is the Jocko good, all caps good. Because I frequently go back to that. Well, not as much lately, but I used to be all over that thing when it came out with like, didn't get the whatever, good, more time to get better. Didn't do this, good, you learned. So that whole good in all caps is kind of my reminder to myself of good, or perceived failure. And another reason why I asked that question on a lot of these episodes is because I want to hear more about it. So I appreciate that. Two more questions. Also asked this one
Sure.
towards the end of all these is biggest struggle that you're working through today? Because it could and it will probably be something that somebody else is working through.
Really what I'm struggling through is just trying to stay faithful, man. Not faithful in terms of my relationships necessarily, but just faithful in my personal walk with Christ. Really being intentional about staying in the Word every morning, being faithful in prayer every morning, and just really thinking about those other things for other people, not for me, but for God's glory, Tony.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I don't mean to say that as that's some big heavy lift, but just really trying to just pray for God's will in certainly my life or that of my families and the people that I love and care about. I've got potentially some crossroads coming up professionally, and that's okay too. And I'm just really grateful for that, whatever that may be, and being okay with that outcome. But also knowing too, just being sensitive to my teammates or other people. I know I can always do a better job reaching out to all the guys I played with, or even just people in the brotherhood that I've met along the way, and just letting them know how much I care about them, how much I appreciate them, how much I respect them. I probably need to apologize to some players or maybe younger players when I was on the staff. I may have wire brushed some young guys, so I might be on some people's hit lists somewhere around there. So anyway, don't hold that against me, fellas. But also just. And I may have cheap shot at some guys at practice too. I'm just admitting that as well. But anyway, biggest struggles though are nothing that are insurmountable. Nothing that just can't be done with a good cadre of people, or just being patient, or just it's good to wait on the sovereignty of the Lord, man. So just waiting to see whatever that will reveal.
Awesome. What's your price of admission?
It's a great question. I think there's an earthly price of admission, and I think that there's an eternal price of admission, Tony. I think the earthly price, just a lot of the themes that are recurring on your podcast here, with a lot of the great players that have come along long before us, or that have come after us, or just the great team that is playing right now. The price of admission is just thinking all about the team, and doing whatever it takes to support the teammates. I mean, I remember Gibber Shaw was like, man, anything for my teammates, anything for the team. And I just love that concept because life is a team game.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really grateful for learning that and understanding that and being held to that standard. So that's a big time price of admission. And then I just love the idea. TJ Hall was class of '95. He was a basketball player actually, but he said, "Man, always give great effort because you'll sometimes get a second chance that way because it doesn't always work first time every time." And knowing that if again thinking about the team, doing your part, busting your hump, doing the extra work, it just sometimes gives you a chance to dust off and reload and get back into the fight. So those two things tend to come to mind. And like you said earlier, you got to give a high level of effort and you got to care because really that only gives you a chance. It only gives you a chance. You know, people are smarter, people are more experienced, people are more athletic, and you just got to give yourself a chance. You know, that's it. So that's probably some of the things that come to mind, Tony, for an earthly or kind of temporal price of admission. I think eternally, though, the price has already been paid, brother. You know, Christ died on the cross for me and for you. Um, God sent His only Son to die on the cross for us, so that we may have eternal life, and all we have to do is accept that. Court is adjourned, right? And that's simply all we need to do is accept it and take His free gift. And He's given us the ability to choose. And man, if there's anyone that listens to this or anyone ever wants to talk about that, man, I'd be more than love to talk to you about it. And what that's done, I wouldn't be here, Tony, talking to you, if that were not the case. And man, I just wish I would have taken that more seriously sooner in my younger days, but I'm thankful to be here now. So the price of admission's free, and it's up to anyone who's willing to accept it. And I'm just really, really thankful for that. But yeah, that's my eternal answer to your question.
Awesome. Man, really appreciate you getting on. And thank the wife and family for your time. We're about an hour and a half, so it's a pretty long one. Usually go like an hour 15 minutes. Yeah, really awesome. I appreciate it. Humbled by the experience. Getting through that book, it was a fun read. Had to ask some questions about it. So thank you.
Well, Tony, thank you. And listen, I think you were on that field in Notre Dame in '07, that triple overtime game. You played in that game. That must have been pretty special, man.
It was. I got pulled out after a broken play, I think in the third quarter. I won't forget that. But it was a great win.
I'm happy for you, man. I mean, that's the coincidentally, you know, the streak my whole lifetime had never been a win, certainly even as a player, but watching you and your teams and Ram, you know, diving over the end there and just all the great plays that everybody made to make that win happen. And my daughter was about a week old. She's 17 now, but she was about a week old, and her streak was one Navy win over Notre Dame. It was pretty cool, man. So congratulations to you, and you know, getting Ohio State on the ropes at that in that opener there in the Horseshoe in '09, and that great culminating win as a senior, you know, beating Missouri in that Houston Bowl. And congratulations, man, you and your class. What a great group. And thanks for what you're doing, man. Really, really, you're doing a lot of really good things, meaningful things, man. I'm honored to be here, brother.
Awesome. Like you said, it's all about the team. That class, same concept for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, take care. Appreciate the time.